Yes, I see our
All right,
picture.
cool.
So I'm Darlene Norman. I have a daughter with Charge syndrome. I'm also in the field of education and had started my career as a school psychologist. In the state of California, I also have a private practice as a licensed educational psychologist and also do community support for families in California. So understanding and accessing the regional center support system or the developmental disability support system here.
And hi, everyone. I'm Julie Meyer, and I'm outside of being a big fan of Darlene Norman's and her daughter, Jet. I am the project coordinator of California Deafblind Services. We were given a list of all the questions and all the attendees ahead of time. So there's a lot of people out there that I know, and I'm happy to see California represented, but many other people I know from the Charge Network. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to be working with children with charge for about 15 years. And I was mentored under this guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. His name's David Brown, but he taught me a few things. And so we are happy to be here tonight. And we have a lot to cover. So why is this not moving? Okay, here we go. Um, so here's our plan for tonight. And honestly, we could talk about each one of these topics for the whole 45 minutes. And we also saw your questions, and they range from questions about very young kids to kids who are young adults who are leaving the school system and all kinds of things related to either goals or placements or specific strategies. So we can't get to everything, but we hope that we'll whet your appetite so that you'll understand how important it is to make sure that deafblindness is clearly detailed and present in an IEP for most, I would say almost every learner with Charge syndrome. So we're going to hit on some assessment, important things to remember during assessment. We're going to talk about what should be considered for developing goals, and we're going to give you some great resources for that. So we won't go too deep into that, but you'll be leaving with resources. We'll talk a bit about eligibility for services because that comes up a lot, especially in the technical assistance I provide. And then we'll also cover, and that probably other state deafblind projects provide. We'll talk about sensory access considerations in multiple areas, and then accommodation services and supports, and you'll have a little toolkit. Now I'm going to hand it to Darlene, who's going to take off with assessment.
Yeah, so we just want to acknowledge that individuals with Charge syndrome um, might have a combined vision and hearing loss. So deafblindness becomes a factor. We also recognize that it's a spectrum and that not every child will have both, but they should always come into consideration because of the factors related to how Charge syndrome presents from a biological standpoint, and that sometimes needs change over time. So we really want to impress upon the fact that deafblindness is a dual sensory loss, and that when that takes place, that there's clear documentation, not only in the eligibility considerations, but on every section of the IEP that describes the student and their needs. So the next three slides are just to highlight that how would we recommend preparing for an assessment. And so when you're working with your child's multidisciplinary assessment team, there needs to be a variety of considerations. You will have a very large assessment team because of the varying needs, even at an early age. And sometimes those team members change over time. They might increase, they might also decrease because as areas improve, students may no longer need certain things. So just be prepared for that. So it really is important for the assessment team to understand the various things related to hearing loss and vision loss. What are the causes of these losses? What types of losses are they? What degree of loss is experienced? And when did the loss occur? Because it can change over time, and sometimes it gets worse. There might be instances where it might get better. Those might be a little more rare, but there are certain circumstances where the loss is based off of something that's temporary in nature. So these are things that need to be considered by the assessment team. We're also very much informed about communication and that families will be driving modes of communication. So it's important for parents to identify what their desires are for their individual child, and they can come in the form of American Sign Language, tactile ASL, protactile ASL, also native spoken languages that might be spoken English, spoken Spanish, and a multitude of other languages that families may have. And also the use of technology, whether it's low tech like pencil paper or tech based such as an iPad that might be of assistance. There's a lot of cultural norms that also need to be acknowledged and followed. Deaf culture is very specific, and it could be the big D, capital D, or a little d that the individual student is immersed in the family themselves. There are also other norms within the low vision and then the deafblind communities that need to be adhered to. And so as a family, you get to express these desires and what you want for your child. If you have not yet heard of the Bill of Rights for deaf and hard of hearing and visual impairment, we do have links in our slides that we would encourage you to click on or do a quick online search to find resources. The links will take you to the statement as to what rights do deaf-blind children have. And because there's 2 sensory losses to consider, there's a lot of things that need to be put in place. And then I do have a specific slide about expanded core curriculum that we are going to touch on. Common Core is essentially what we think about reading, writing, and math. But expanded Common Core is there's so much more to the learning needs and environment for dual sensory loss that needs to be included in the IEP and the assessment. All right, I mentioned the large team. So one of those important team members is a teacher of the visually impaired. And it is instrumental that they are one of the first team members that are included and begin the evaluation process, because it will be necessary for all the other assessment team members to be familiar with what that information entails. The functional vision assessment and the learning media assessment will describe the access points that students have. Are they able to access print, large print? Are they able to, or do they require Braille, for example? Communication interpretation needs. If the student has ASL as their primary language or more of the specialized tactile or protactile, you will need to identify assessment team members who are proficient in these communication modalities and or rely upon an interpreter who will assist. There are oftentimes not assessment team members who are knowledgeable or experienced in the primary language of the student, and that's a factor. The next 2, it's an acronym, RIOT, ISIL, and it's a matrix. And so it is also another term that I would encourage people to do an online search for to learn about. But essentially, there's a variety of ways that assessments can be conducted. Many assessment teams want to rely upon testing measures, standardized testing measures, but for individuals with deafblindness, there are very few standardized tests that are adapted or appropriate. It doesn't mean we shouldn't use them. It just means that we have to carefully consider when we use them and if they should be used for qualitative information purposes versus quantitative. And that means, are scores important, or is the description of the student and how they present more important? And there's lots of rich information that you provide as parents to the educational team. The educational team is also able to provide a lot of information in the form of interviews and observations. Instruction, curriculum, environment, and the learner themselves are always going to be at the center for the review of records, interview, observation, and testing. And then to quickly touch on the last 2 points, assistive listening devices might be used, and that they need to be incorporated if for access purposes, such as FM systems, hearing aids, and other low vision tools. There is a marvelous, beautiful video called "What is Language Deprivation" by the Niall DeMarco Foundation. He's a deaf man who has a wonderful foundation that promotes the understanding of language needs. Without language, it is likely that the students skill sets will be underestimated and also underserved. So I encourage you to watch that video. And lastly, in order to do a solid assessment, assessment that the team is confident in, they really do need to spend a lot more time, both preparing and administrating. And so this is the references that can be shared with the assessment team for your child, and that there may be adaptations and modifications needed. Really, any scores or numbers need to be interpreted with caution. Descriptive, qualitative descriptors are really helpful to describe what the individual can do and then what they also struggled with. But it's also about the presentation. And we also have an indication of observations that are really helpful. David Brown has the follow the child approach that we encourage people to learn more about, and that the child themselves will teach us and show us many things. They just need to be given the opportunity.
Thanks, Darlene. Yeah, so, and there are so many other resources out there related to assessment. I mean, it's hard to, I can't believe we just did assessment in like 6 minutes. So, but bravo, that was so good. So, and there are resources near the end, and really you can reach out to, we have a lot of resources on our California Deafblind Services website. Some of the other state projects do, the National Center does. But this is where you have to start, obviously, is assessment it's what's going to help you get to the place of determining whether a student is eligible for services. And then every 3 years, they do another assessment, the triennial, that determines if the child still requires those same services and they're still eligible in that way. And I wanted to state at the beginning, we have about a split in terms of the participants, at least who registered, between families and professionals. And so we're really speaking to both groups. And I really want to emphasize that we also understand, Darlene from a very personal level and me from attending IEPs with parents, like how stressful and scary sometimes this can be, the IEP process, also frustrating, but also for professionals, we know how hard you're working to get this right. And we know that charge is very rare. And then even when you've met one student with charge syndrome, the next one's very different. So I just want to just applaud the professionals that are here wanting to learn more, and also let the parents know that you really need to go in there as much as possible with confidence, knowing how important your voice and your advocacy is. Okay, so once you have the assessment, part of why Darlene and I put this information together and we presented it at a poster session at the conference last summer was I'm contacted by both families and lots of times administrators and also teachers about this, if a child's deaf blind or not, and if they qualify for being deaf blind under their primary eligibility category in the IEP. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit. That's my main point here. Like if it does fit for some learners, and if it doesn't, what else could you do? And then what are the other places in the IEP where deaf blindness should be incorporated? So not to preach too much to the choir out there, but for those who don't know, there's 13 categories that are listed in IDEA, and plus developmental delay is listed for Part C, so birth to 3, and then some states continue to offer it. So, and deaf blindness is its own unique category. So if a child is both deaf or hard of hearing and blind low vision, you don't have to do blind and deaf, you can do deaf blind. It's its own specific disability category. And the assessments, what the results are from what the team gathers about the student, that's what they're going to use to determine the eligibility for services. And so oftentimes states allow you to list two, but typically it's the primary eligibility that then is reported to the state government, keeps track of that, and then the federal government. And what I want to stress to people, because this is why I actually went and wrote a brief 3-page article about it that we give you in the resources, is if deaf blindness is not selected, that doesn't mean the student's not deaf blind. Okay, so let me say that again. And I hear this from teams and families of children with charge, even so maybe they have pretty good vision, but they have moderate or profound hearing loss, or else their vision is really impacted, but with their assistive listening devices, their hearing is okay. That combination of those two senses having diminished efficiency in both of those senses leads to the issue of deafblindness. So it doesn't have to be deafblind on that first page for a child not to be deafblind. It's kind of tricky. There's a link here that takes you just to a really nice page that talks about all the categories under IDEA. So now let's look just at two of the categories, because these are the two that are often picked for kids with charge: deafblindness or multiple disabilities. And they're not that great of they I guess they're I don't think they're great definitions, because it doesn't really say what the child needs or how to instruct the child. It just says where they can't really be educated. But deafblindness means that there's accompanying hearing and vision issues, and that it impacts the child's ability to develop language and make educational progress in a program only for children who are blind or only for children who are deaf. And then multiple disabilities is similar. It says that there's more than one disability. So it might be an intellectual disability, or it might be an orthopedic impairment combined with a low incidence disability. And again, it can't be met in a program just for one of those disabilities. But multiple disabilities does not include deafblindness. So a child who only has vision and hearing loss, but doesn't have any other accompanying disability, no intellectual disability or physical disability, that student is deafblind. But if they have an additional disability, then they would be considered multiple disabilities. Okay, so this is where it gets trickier for people. And this is why I'll hear from a family that says, I want my child to have deafblindness as an eligibility category. And the district says that the federal government does not allow that, that it's impossible, you can't do it. And so I really started thinking about, well, what about that secondary eligibility category? So, and I looked into what the federal reporting guidance is, and this is what states are told. And because every year they've got to report this. They're told if the child only has two disabilities that are deafness and blindness, and they don't have a developmental delay, then they're reported under the category of deafblind. If the child has more than one disability and is not reported as having deafblindness or has a developmental delay, then they're reported under the category of multiple disabilities. So it's really those children, and this is true for many with charge, not all. Many children with charge do meet this criteria for deafblind. There isn't that accompanying intellectual disability. But for some there is, and that's why states then, and why districts pick multiple disabilities, because the state and the federal government is saying you can't pick deafblindness in that case. You have to pick multiple disabilities. And in the article I wrote, I promise you, in the 3-page article, I state this in a very clear manner, probably more clear than I'm expressing to you right now. But I want to show you where this is interesting and why it's important that there first are state deafblind projects, but also why it might be important to have deafblindness listed as the secondary eligibility category. Because if you only go by deafness and blindness, that kind of deafblind with no additional disability, I'm going to show you an example from California. In 2023, the California Department of Education reported 87 children from kindergarten, so 5 years old, to 22, who were eligible as deafblind. So they only had deafness and blindness. So that is probably children that may have Usher syndrome, they may have Alstrom syndrome, they may have Charge syndrome. Okay. Every state deafblind project every year does an annual child count as well. That's one of the mandates of our federal funded grant. In the same year, when we counted, and we counted 0 to 3 as well, so we counted from birth to 22, but that's a relatively small number, that 0 to 3, how many children there are. We counted 1,138. So that isn't that the state is missing those kids. These are those kids that have additional disabilities. Or maybe kids who have a type of deafblindness that may be progressive. And right now, so sometimes also they don't maybe count a child who has Usher syndrome if the vision loss hasn't started occurring yet because they're very young. Or maybe with Charge syndrome, as we know, some children with Charge syndrome don't have colobomas or any other kind of visual issues, so maybe they wouldn't be counted. But that's a really stark difference. So most kids who are deafblind do have some kind of additional disability, 90%, okay? And including many children with Charge syndrome who are going to fall under that because of some of the other issues that happen, especially early on in their development. Okay, so based on that, many teams determine that a child with Charge syndrome is eligible under multiple disabilities. And because they'll say it's either the visual impairment, the hearing impairment, or deafness, and the additional disability, or the intellectual disability. My apologies. But when they select that as a primary, the federal guidance about what to select for the secondary is not as clear. So I, as much as possible, stress to teams and families, try to have deafblindness listed as a second, because I think it's important that it is out there as a very important thing to know about this child and to be always considering in terms of their the instruction that they're receiving, the services and supports, and the accommodations. But that is not always the case. And as I said earlier, sometimes deafblindness is not selected as either one of the eligibility categories. And that is okay. It doesn't mean that they're not deafblind. It just means you don't have it right there at the front of the report. So I do tell people, don't stress if the district really feels like it's important that they're listing something else, okay? So here's what I offer in that article, and I offer when I talk to people during my technical assistance or consultation. As I just said, deafblindness if you can. It's because it keeps everybody focused on that, on both the visual and auditory access needs. In some cases, it may make sense for visual impairment to be selected, say in a situation where maybe a district or has a very strong program for students who are blind, low vision, or have vision loss. And maybe there's a lot of assistive technology used in that program, but it's a program that's designed for students with vision loss and additional disabilities. And if this student has fairly good functional hearing and assistive listening devices are working and they're not using, ASL is not their primary language, that might be an appropriate program for them. And it might be important on the IEP that vision loss is listed as a secondary category underneath multiple disabilities. I've met other families. In fact, there was a family I just worked with 2 years ago that this was a parent that was really, she had always had deafblindness in the IEP from early on as the secondary, but she really wanted to now move to deafness because she really wanted the focus of the team to be on his need that he was going to be in a classroom where there was exposure to sign language. And so having deafness listed underneath multiple disabilities, then deafness, was a way for the district to then ensure that he was served in a program where ASL was going to be a language that was offered in terms of instruction and communication. And then another one that is sometimes considered is other health impaired. And that's a nice one to kind of address some of the issues that come up with individuals with Charge because of their health needs and their needs for sensory breaks, the high levels of fatigue that some of them may need. So sometimes that's listed in terms of ensuring that the student has all those kinds of accommodations and services included in their IEP. And then in the article that I wrote, most of it is actually focused on these 5 circles, because if it's not listed under eligibility, because again, in some cases it isn't, there's still so many other places where it should be included in the IEP. So first, under present levels. So that's either in the assessment reports, there's always then within the IEP a short bit about each area of need. And so there, you're talking about what the student's skills are in that area, but you're also talking about their particular support needs. And you can also be talking about what their interests are and also the types of uh, equipment or accommodations that they use. So that can be written just in those front parts of all those goal pages. There's a section called special factors that includes assistive technology. So does the student qualify and need that? Does a student need specific instruction or specialized services for their vision loss? Does the student need specialized instructions for deafness? So that's not only it being in a deaf ASL environment. That's also any other all the other instructional techniques that are used for students who are deaf, hard of hearing. Do they have behavioral needs? And are they low incidence? And students who are deafblind, so students who are either deaf, hard of hearing, blind, low vision, or deafblind, or orthopedically impaired are all eligible for low incidence. So all those areas, again, you can be talking about the students and really clearly in detail writing about the students' needs in each of those areas. Obviously, programs and accommodations is a great page to be listing all the different equipment, the adaptations that are being made to the curriculum, but also to instruction, sensory strategies or interventions that are being used, behavioral strategies. We're going to show you a nice example there. And then after they talk about services and supports, there's also another section called other services and supports, which is related to what the team needs to implement this IEP. And that's an area to put in possibly that the team may need training in deafblindness. They may need to have consultation from the state deafblind project, or they may need training in charge syndrome specifically. And then finally, one other place is the offer of FAPE. So that's the free and appropriate public education. So what the district's offering for the program. And they have to list everything that was discussed at the meeting. So it's not just the program that they've decided to say, this is the one we want. They have to talk about every other option and program that they discuss. So whether that was general education with supports, if it was a deaf program, a visual impairments program, all of it. So that's another place if they've talked about services in a deaf environment or an environment for students with vision loss or in a general ed class with supports, those should all be listed there. And I think I'm passing it back.
Yeah. So I just want to encourage parents at any time to, and actually school district personnel, to invoke the services of the technical assistance team of the state deafblind project. We elected to do that early on. It actually was initiated an early start by the low vision teacher for my daughter. And ever since then, like, it has been really instrumental, and it sets the stage for when you're building, starting the IEP system and building upon the identification, but also the needs, because needs change from the early developmental stages to when you get to high school and post-secondary programs and things like that. So we do want to highlight the expanded Common Core curriculum, and I want to emphasize that this starts at birth. So even as early start teams, the IFSPs that get developed, families, the rules and supports do change from an IFSP to an IEP. There's more of a family and home focus to then school-based and what that looks like. And so considering the continuum of deafblindness, there are several bullet points here, and there are a few that cross over into the deaf, hard of hearing and the blind, low vision categories, such as self-determination and technology, career education, particularly as the students get towards transition age, typically age 14 and up. And so, but there are so many categories here under audiology, family education, skills, educational success, advocacy, social skills, whether they're social emotional or social interactions, are really important components. And so it's not just about functional academics or academics overall. These are all things that need to be considered at every age and how they apply. So some might be incorporated early on, and some might be added in over time. But educating yourself and reading about the expanded core curriculum in each of these areas will help give the team a, a foundation of where to start talking about the student. And they also tie into the Bill of Rights that students who are deaf, hard of hearing, and low vision have. And so these are all important topics to really support the varying student needs. But especially as they get to transition age, there's a lot of changes and focuses about what the future entails for the student, what the student is interested in, what the family would like to help the student achieve, whether it's a diploma or an alternate diploma or a certificate of completion. Many things can go into supporting the student. For this one, we are wanting to make sure we have identification of different areas. So the first one, we focus on strengths and interests, and we can gather that in a variety of ways. Students produce a variety of work as part of their school day or program participation. And so there's lots of portfolios or artifacts that can be provided that can give guidance and share information about what the student is interested in and likes to do or is good at. Parents, you're going to be a valuable resource to share about your child and what they're like in multiple environments, in the home, the community setting, medical appointments, and what those experiences are. And observations from all team members are going to be valuable. What do students gravitate towards in different environments? Because they might be consistent across various environments, but they might be different as well. And sometimes specific interest inventories are helpful. There are ones that become available for the student to participate in as they age up, but otherwise they do incorporate the family and what educational staff see.
And Darlene, this is Julie. If I could just jump in here, this part is so important. I feel like for students with multisensory issues like children with charge, because lots of times the report that comes out is showing all these deficits and all these things that the child is not able to do or where they're not on par with their peers. And I've always felt that there's nothing you can do with that. I mean, that maybe that's interesting information to somebody, but how is that going to help you select a goal for a student? So it's much more important to find out what their strengths are, what they're interested in, where were they last year compared to where they are this year to build those goals.
The next is identification of needs and priorities. Again, there's so many team members that are going to be included. It can be a lot, sometimes overwhelming. And sometimes it also means that you have longer meetings or multiple meetings just to get through the information. And so but when we talk about needs, they often are derived from identified deficits, but they also need to be about student-centered areas of growth. And so what are the focus areas? And so our students who are deafblind can have many goals. I've seen IEPs, that can bridge into 30 goals. And I know team members might panic when there's that number of goals. And I will say, I am not a proponent as a professional and as a parent to say that the more goals, the better. It's actually the opposite. I think there are some goals and areas that can be developed that actually are consolidated to encompass a variety of team members to be inclusive and responsible to address specific needs, that where foundational skills might need to continue to be built, but the overall annual goal is a rigorous goal that's identified and can accomplish things. It can and will take explanation on the team's part to discuss what that looks like. So I just want to highlight that it's important that the annual goal is developed in a way that reaches for a rigorous attainment, and that there might be some micro skills that continue to need to be developed, and that's okay. And there are going to be circumstances where you do need to be very specific and detailed in the minutia of how it's written, and that's understandable too, especially if there hasn't been accountability for progress or service delivery. That might be a need. But just know that it's not always necessarily that the more goals the better, because it can be a lot to manage for large teams. And so it's really about the whole overall child, and where many of these skills might intersect. So we really want to highlight collaboration, multidisciplinary collaboration. All right, and so these are the various IEP goal areas that can be identified, and sub-skills. So under academic, pre-academic, or functional academic skills, there's a few areas that can bridge into including study skills, organization, not just reading, writing, and math. Communication, there's at least 6 areas that can be specifically focused on for students with Charge syndrome: articulation, receptive, expressive, pragmatic, voice, and fluency. I mean, these are all things that I know that from personal experience, we've talked about each of these for my daughter. And so articulation skills might be a focus in the beginning, but over time as language grows, or there might be other means of communication, such as using technology. So motor, social, emotional, behavioral, adaptive or daily living type skills, and transition planning. This is really the ultimate focus of what will the student do after they're finished with their education. What are their aspirations? Where would they like to see? And how do we as IEP team members help set them up for success in their training, future employment, and independent living?
And Darlene put together this fantastic multi-page link that will take you to a lot of examples in each of those areas, okay? So if you're like, yeah, but tell me what should the goal look like, you'll see some very specific, great examples.
This is a screenshot of an accommodation page of my daughter, and it has evolved over time, and there are many things on here. There's actually so much that it doesn't all fit on one page. So you will likely have that experience as well, where there might need to be a reference that there are additional accommodations in the notes or another section, depending on what the IEP program allows to incorporate. But you'll see a lot of references for low vision needs, such as large print. So it's going to be individualized to the learner and what their needs are. There might be a reference for Braille if that's something that's for low vision need. Lots of information about deaf access for FM systems, low vision. Another one is the long cane for mobility and use, or a monocular to be able to pinpoint visual access needs. There's also a lot of accommodations listed in here for social, emotional, and sensory needs. That is often the case for children with Charge, is that they need a variety of strategies that get taught to them and that they work on implementing for independence, but they also might need support from the individual staff members to help provide that, such as providing extra breaks. But we really want to teach the students their own self-determination of like recognizing that when they need a break and how they communicate that so that they are more independent with it.
So we have 2 slides on tips and suggestions that I want to get through quickly so we have time for questions. But first, hopefully on the team, there's someone that has some deafblind experience that can kind of guide and lead the team. There's one educational professional that can be like helping to support the family as they bring up some of these areas and these topics and strategies that we've talked about. And then it's important for you to find out in your state which teachers have the credentials to be supporting someone who a student who's deafblind. And then as they present reports, be looking in the reports what are the interventions and supports and accommodations that are being talked about, like what's currently being used, what's needed, and those are the types of things that you want to make sure is documented well in the IEP. Finally, professionals, you need to take that time that Darlene talked about to ask and listen to what the students and family members can tell you about what works and what doesn't work in terms of the supports and accommodations, and also what are their goals, not just for the next year, but for their future. And as much as possible in the IEP, describe their access needs, the services and supports, and accommodations and modifications very clearly and with as much detail as possible, so that when this IEP moves to another team, they understand what is needed. Look, if you want help, your state deafblind projects are here to provide this type of support and assistance. And then finally, we always remind families, you don't need to sign the IEP. At the IEP, you can review it very carefully and offer any additional information or revisions in writing if you feel that's needed.
There is
And then
power. Oh, sorry. This is
go
Darlene.
ahead.
There is power in the parent statement. So if you look at the Charge Syndrome Foundation website, I had done a presentation at the last conference specifically on the parent statement. It's something I do for every IEP, whether it's an annual IEP, an assessment IEP, or an amendment. I always highlight and identify these are the things that I appreciate as the parent, such as implementing an intervener, for example. And I continue to thank them for the things that they're doing well. And then when there are disagreements, identifying, specifying what those are. So I encourage you to access that resource.
And then that is added as an addendum to the IEP. So that's another place that deafblindness is described and included. The next two pages just have resources. This is the first article David Brown wrote about Follow the Child. He wrote another one in 2014 following up on it. But this one's very good in terms of thinking about approaches for assessment. And you can find the other one on his little list on his Facebook page or on most deafblind project pages. That next article is the one that I wrote about making sense of the eligibility categories. And then in that same, this was from the California Deafblind Services newsletter, I wrote an article about developing goals that are actually rigorous and ambitious and realistic, because I think sometimes these students are underestimated. And then the National Center has a nice practice guide on appropriate assessment strategies. So that's useful for professionals and families. And then Darlene, do you want to talk about the last three?
Yeah, so this next one, the guide resource, it's titled "A School Psychologist's Guide to Deafblindness," and so it's an excellent resource for looking at the assessment lens and sharing it with educational teams as when they plan for assessments. Even though it's identifies school psychologists, it's very much appropriate for all assessment team members to have access to and read, and as a family member to learn more about. As we've mentioned, deafblindness is a really a complex topic. And so there's a web page here with references for assessing and understanding sensory loss. This is a resource that has been generated through a presentation that I do with two of my school psychologist friends, one who supports a deaf hard of hearing program and another who is a school psychologist for the State School for the Blind. And so the three of us come together with the deaf hard of hearing, the blind low vision, and the deaf blindness aspect to present to school psychologists, but also educational professionals of how do you approach the assessment process in a way that's meaningful and will support the learning needs. So there's a lot of references for a variety of things in there. And the last one is the resource document for deafblind IEP examples that I put together as a Google Doc. It's also available through the Charge Syndrome Foundation website as part of the resources that we built from the conference this past summer. I did want to highlight too that there are other organizations that focus on deafblindness. So the National Family Association for Deafblind and the National Center for Deafblindness are great resources to engage in and read about and even involve yourself in if you have not yet learned about those organizations.
And then there's our contact information. And I'm going to stop the share. And I think I saw some things were popping up in the chat, but we also have some of the questions that came prior to the. So Lourdes, how do you
Yes,
want to do it for the last 5?
yes, definitely. let me help with that. We have a couple of good questions. Thank you for the presentation. It was
Mhm.
very informative. I was also sharing with the group that we're going to be sharing your slides with everybody that registered so they could have access to all of those
Yep.
wonderful resources and links. So we have a question. The first question is, if a child is listed as deaf-blind as their eligibility, but does have an intellectual disability, should it be changed to multiple disabilities?
Oh, deafblind is the first?
Yes. But they also have intellectual disability. So
Yeah.
because of that, should it be changed
Well,
to multiple?
I mean, I think it's great that it's listed, so I think I would say, but it's not how it's described under the federal guidelines. But if that's what the district's offering, I don't know what state this this and perhaps that state has a different. But in California, our the definition for all the categories is the same as it is under IDEA, and that's true for most states. So that's interesting. You don't often see that.
I would say it's okay
Yeah,
that they're both
yeah,
listed. And
yeah.
so it does not mean that multiple disabilities has to be
Mhm.
selected because, and it's okay if it is, it would just be really important to have that specified in the notes what that exactly means because there's two disabilities that are being combined together.
Mhm. Yeah.
Then the second question is, how do we know what accommodations are possible? It was very helpful to see the screenshot side, Darlene. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to reiterate going to that resource document. It's a Google Doc. I typed in a long list, and many of these will apply at early ages and still apply at older grade levels. And so, I think there's a lot of resources that can be identified by doing searches, or if people would like to use AI to find some that are references, I would encourage people to research what accommodations might be appropriate. But I think the ones that are listed there, it's pretty comprehensive,
Mhm.
and we got those in early, and they've pretty much stayed stagnant. Some of the details might evolve over time, but putting them in place early is will help because then they just kind of stay there because they're oftentimes not going to change.
And if I could just add, typically, oftentimes, who's putting the thinking of the accommodations is your teacher of visual impairments will list all the vision ones, and then the deaf hard of hearing teacher and the audiologist are going to list the ones related to hearing or deafness. The occupational therapist hopefully is listing a lot of the sensory and physical ones. So hopefully it's not up to you as a parent to come and know everything. So hopefully it's the different related service providers and teachers on your team that are going to say, oh, he needs to have a slant board. Or where you might need to really push, though, I think, is for things like, and David Brown's going to love this, seating, like that they have the right like supports and things like that, or that you're allowing them to lay back down and cross their leg over their knee so that they can read this book. So there might have to actually be something specific in there that they don't have to sit at a desk to do their work all day, and that they have the proper seating and that their feet are on the floor. They might need to have stretchy bands, things like that. So that's where you might have to have people think a little bit outside of the box.
Yes, taking accommodations to like physical accommodations,
Mhm.
literally.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So this question's hard. What can I do if the school system says that they cannot enforce teachers or teams to take technical training?
I'd say it needs to go in your parent statement
Hmm.
and continue to document it.
Yeah.
I mean, they need to give you a reason why that they're not going to engage in it if they feel they're proficient and but they're showing you that they're not. That it's your right to request them, and that you would want to ask them to provide you with a prior written notice letter why they are declining to do that to access that resource. But you know, I'll pass on.
I agree. And what I would add is that I think sometimes some people by acknowledging or requesting technical assistance, they feel like they're acknowledging that they are not skilled or that they don't know something, and they feel like they're being evaluated. So I think as much as possible to help them understand that technical assistance is just consultation and provision of supportive resources. Like we are, the Deaf Blind Project is not here to evaluate you. They are here to help and assist you. And it's so, this is such low incidence that it's very rare for you to have a child like this. And there are people that have special expertise. So, and if you can even find one champion, one person on the team that's like, I want that help, that person can get it and they can bring it back to the team. But yeah. But
And
lots
like
of
you
times I
said,
think they think they're being assessed or evaluated, and that's hard for people.
mhm, perfect, perfect. All right, and we have one last question. It says, what is the best way to approach this integration to a team still developing an understanding of deaf blindness and charge?
Can you say what did you say disintegration or the integration?
This integration.
Okay.
So I would recommend picking a few key points to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And they might, so identifying a theme as to what are the needs. And I would probably indicate that it's likely under the umbrella of communication,
Yeah.
and then likely behavioral components. And those two are intertied. And also, accessing their environment are often going to be a few things. So being able to specify and identify these are a couple of areas of focus. And if you have to get more specific, that's totally fine. But I would say those are often the areas of challenge, and that you to not give up. Essentially, like if they continue to be issues or the student is struggling, you're seeing behaviors as a result of them struggling. That's your method to continue to advocate for those topics of how we need to focus on deafblindness.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, great answer. So I don't think we have any more questions for now. However, I do have good news for our parents joining in. Next week, we're gonna have our parent recharge hour, which is kind of like our virtual meetings between parents where we share tips, experiences, and support each other. This is gonna be our topic. We're gonna talk about IEPs and um, our experiences, and we could talk a little bit more about this, what we learned today. And if you still have any more questions, you could join us next week. We're going to have a session on Tuesday, 5 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Mountain time, 7 Central, and 8 o'clock Eastern. And on Wednesday, we're going to have a really nice time, very suitable for our friends in the Western area. It's going to be at 7 o'clock Central time, 8 o'clock Mountain, 9 o'clock Central, and 10 o'clock Eastern time. So we will also share the sign up for that if you want to join us. And also, I would like to make an announcement for the next Ask the Expert. We are going to have Dr. Kim Blake and,
Oh,
yes, Claudia Jennings. They're going
oh,
to be talking about medical issues in adults with SHARS syndrome. So we hear this a lot, and I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity as well. So just wanted to share those resources and circle back to our wonderful presenters tonight. Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Darlene, for this
you're welcome.
wonderful information. Very, I know that's going to help a lot of families, and we'll hope to have you again soon. So, thank you so very much for everyone that joined us today. We will be sharing the links for the recordings and the slides as a follow-up in the next couple of days. So once again, thank you, and you'll have a wonderful night.
Thanks, everyone.